Episode 1 of the To the Throne podcast.
We are here.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Dan Santana.
This is Dakota Kingrea.
Kingrea.
Yeah, Kingrea.
Not Kingrea
No?
or King
Some people,
Ray.
Some people do Kingrea.
Kingrea.
But it's Kingrea.
Kingrea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Silent A.
There's an A there, but it's...
Yeah. I think it's Swedish or something like that. I don't know.
Well, that's sweet of you.
Yeah.
That it's Swedish.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, welcome to the Throne podcast. We're glad you're here.
Yeah.
First one. We're excited. This is something that we kind of been talking about.
For a while, actually. Yeah.
Right. And we just decided, you know what? 2021, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's
go for it.
2020's over.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
And let's just do the things that we've been, wanting and talking and dreaming.
Things that God has been telling us and put on our hearts to do.
So if you know us, awesome. We're glad you're here. If you don't, you're going to get to know us a little bit more. But today we kind of want to talk a little bit about a video, right? And, To the Throne's been around for 4 years, kind of.
Yeah.
Yes, in different phases and different things, on and off.
Different capacities.
And it's been around, but, in 2021, it kind of got a new life and a new birth, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it kind of, To the Throne kind of became something that we realized, okay, this is something that's going to have to be lived too, you know? And so we've been talking about it for many years, and, a video kind of came out, was our first major release basically of this year that we wanted to do. And we thought it was very important. And it was a video on your story.
Yeah, my story.
Right?
What I walked through.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen it, it's a story of overcoming.
Yeah.
Right?
It's on our IGTV. You can take a look at that.
Right. And, watch it first off, get a reference of it. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about it, but it would be good to watch it and get that reference if you haven't already seen it. But we felt it was important, to share kind of your story because you're to the throne, this is you.
Yeah.
And so what better way to kind of launch this new life of To the Throne than to actually talk about your life and what you've gone through.
What it's looked like to, go to the throne in a difficult situation I walked through. You watch the video and you can see, get the reference for what that is. Yeah. But, a lot of people had questions on, the video is called A Story of Overcoming and what it's looked like to overcome in one of the most difficult situations anyone can go through. Right. But a lot of people had questions on what it looks like. It sort of was left open-ended on, I've overcome. But, today we just want to talk about, what that actually looks like and what the process of overcoming has been and dive a little bit deeper. So, we're glad you're here.
So, check out the story, of course, and, bring your tissue if you haven't.
Yeah.
But this is life, and life happens. But the good thing is we have a good God who takes care of us, and we know that we go through things, and many of the things we go through, hardships, are for a testimony, and it's to help people through their life. And so in this, it's basically a testimony of what God has brought you through. Yeah. But you did leave it open ended. Yeah. And this is a story of overcoming. But at the end of the video, we'll kind of mention it right now. At the end of the video, you say, you moved to Nashville, and it was out of obedience of what God has, told you to do, even out of this hard place in your life.
Right.
But it just kind of ends. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so, we did that on purpose, which was good, and it kind of led to this conversation. But you got personal questions, of course, and people kind of message us saying, "Okay, awesome,
well,
but
what does that mean?
What does that mean? Yeah. Right? Yeah. A story of overcoming."
Right.
Because in the world, you think of overcoming as something different.
Yeah, you think of a complete sort of chapter ending. You think of a happy ending and a full story. The end of the end of the movie, but it's sort of the exact opposite.
Right.
It's a process. That's what it is. Overcoming is just it's process.
That's it.
Yeah, that's what it's been, and we want to do that on purpose because. There's so many things you can't go super in depth about, and we wanted to make the video about how God has walked me through that process, and today we just wanted to give a little more context. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's ask the question.
Yeah.
Let's say, okay, you kind of gave a, I moved to Nashville, ...
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What's the ... What has moving to Nashville been? Basically, you moved here last year,
Right.
In the fall. So it's now summer.
September, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's now summer, and it's been about probably 9 months right now.
9 months, yeah.
So what is that? What is Nashville? What does overcoming look like, really?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, it's way different than I immediately thought. When God laid on my heart to move to Nashville in the season that I was in, it didn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost was like, okay, this is the biggest step of my life. This is the biggest thing I've ever done. This is the most sacrifice I will ever have to make. It sort of seemed like, and I immediately thought, okay, like this is the pinnacle of what my hard decisions are gonna look like, and this is the pinnacle of what, the difficulty of the situation will look like. And it was actually the exact opposite. Moving here, was actually the easiest part, and because overcoming has looked like such a slow burn of a process. You think sometimes that, when God asks you to do something and you say, okay, God, I'll do it. And it's something as big as moving away from everyone you've ever known, moving away from, your family, and moving away from my kids, which is the hardest part. And basically, essentially starting your whole life over from scratch. You think that because you're taking that step, that there's a pot of gold waiting at the end, at the immediate end of that decision.
Right,
and it's not the case at all.
Right.
It's actually just, you walk through the door and then you're like, okay, well, there's a million other things that you have to walk through. And it's almost, it's so very similar to, the Israelites walking out of Egypt. It's so very similar, because they walked out of Egypt and God did a miracle to get them out of that place. And he parted the Red Sea. And then they walked through the desert for 40 years, and, they got out of Egypt, but Egypt was still in them.
That's it. And
they still, they still viewed themselves as slaves, and God had to remove that slavery mentality and that bondage from them, even though they weren't in slavery anymore. And so I'm sure it was very similar on how they had to make the biggest move of their lives. They were slaves for like 400 years,
right?
A long time. And so it had been ingrained for generations.
Mm-hmm.
And until, the Lord told Moses to break them free. And so they had to release so many things. And some people died in the wilderness. Some people didn't make it to the promised land. And so it's looked very much like that. As, I've moved here, and, at first I was like, okay, God, I'm taking the biggest step of my life. So there's got to be, some greatness at the end of this,
right?
Which there is, but it's been a lot slower and a lot more, of a process than I thought. And it's actually killed a lot of pride in me, because it was almost like, okay, God, I'm doing this for you. So I feel like you owe me something.
Right.
And it's actually been like, no, it's not, first of all, God doesn't owe me anything.
Yeah.
Because he's already, gave me everything I need. But it's actually been like, no, God has to remove things in me and walk me through process and recreate identity in me that I lost for so many years, and recreate faithfulness and obedience in me and reestablish that in my life. And all those things take time. Yeah. And all those things take process. And all those things take faithfulness and just grit. And that's a sort of an overarching vision of what it looks like.
So, one of the things too that I think we've talked about is, people see overcoming as this physical, natural overcoming, right? Like, this tangible overcoming. So you have this story of overcoming. And I think what can confuse people is that, wait, you're not rich now?
Right.
Or wait, you know what I mean? Like, wait,
yeah,
did you meet this amazing person and you got married?
I'm not remarried.
Right.
I'm not,
Or do you get the dream job?
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Or this house or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
It's all these natural things. So when you hear that,
Yeah.
how do you respond, like based on where you're living right now, right?
Right.
Because you made a post on your
Yeah.
personal Instagram, which I thought was great because it's an insight of your life and saying this is everything that you
This
have
is what
right
it
now.
looks like, yeah.
Yes, it's a miracle, by the way.
Yeah.
Because it's something you prayed for.
Oh yeah.
So God provided, but it doesn't look
No, it's
like the natural, like in the natural that you're overcoming in life, right?
Yeah. It's almost like I think spiritual things always happen before physical. And you look at my life and what it's costed me and what the sacrifice has been
Right.
of overcoming, and it's like you said, it's a miracle. We look back at before I moved here and the times I prayed and the conversations that we had and be like, I know God's calling me there. I know God's calling me to Nashville.
Right.
I know He's calling me to do this, but I have zero idea how it's going to happen. There was a zero way, and He made a way where there was no way.
Yeah.
And so, but you look at the things in my life. I work at a night job at Amazon, a night shift at Amazon. I work 6:30 p.m. to 5 a.m. During the week, and it's brutal.
Yeah.
And I live in a bedroom in some random house, and it's like I don't have any decorations on my wall. And if you know me, I'm like, it really irritates me. Like I've got the worst looking bedding possible, and I'm like, I don't have a desk, but my computer's on this. It's like weird stuff. But I have a bed to sleep in, and for a long time I didn't have a bed to sleep in.
Oh.
And and I have a roof over my head. A long time, there were months where I was going through what I was going through, and I didn't have a place to sleep.
Right.
I had to call random friends. I'd stayed in people's houses. I had no idea who they were.
Wow.
Slept on their couch. But I now have a bed to sleep in.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a car to drive. And now I have a minivan, which I love.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a car to drive.
I mean, you could justify the minivan because you have kids, right?
Right.
So,
it makes sense.
Okay.
But,
it's still weird because you're this dude here.
I'm just some random, it seems like I'm some random single dude that just drives a white minivan.
Right.
Which is it's dope though. Pontiac, Montana.
Yeah, that's it.
It's dope. But, you look at all those things and elements that look like they're not overcoming. My life doesn't look like I'm winning,
right?
But I am, and it's because those things have actually created in me overcoming for my soul, and it's the physical things that it's Jesus had to go through suffering to learn obedience.
Yeah, yeah.
And for me, I've had to go through suffering for my soul to overcome.
Right.
And before anything physical can, look like overcoming in my life or look like winning in my life, I have to get in a place where I'm walking through wilderness.
Yeah.
So that the bondage I was in, the abuse I was in, the pain I was in,
right.
The habits that I had that were not healthy,
right.
The all the elements of my life that were in me in past seasons,
right.
had to be ripped out.
Wow.
But it takes a wilderness to do that. It would be so much harder for me and my soul to overcome if I walked here and it was a red carpet.
In comfort.
And I walked here in comfort.
Right.
Because it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Jesus was born in a manger.
That's
and
it.
He walked for 30 years before he did any ministry.
There you go.
And before anyone really knew who he was.
Right. Right.
Before he did any miracles. Before people really knew he was the Son of God. He walked for 30 years.
Yeah.
And Moses, you look at all the people in the Bible, David, all these people walked in wilderness.
Right.
And walked in fields and walked in the unknown.
Right.
Before God gave them, what looks like overcoming.
Yes.
What looks like winning, what looks like, before David ever was a king, he had to be a shepherd. And before he was, ever walked into the palace, he had to defeat Goliath. And before he even defeated Goliath, he had to fight the bear and the lion.
There you go.
And so it's like, that's what my life has looked like. And, like I said, my life it doesn't look like I'm winning.
Yeah.
But I am, because my soul is overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been because I've had to walk through suffering. I've had to walk through obedience and say, and humility, and say, okay, it's not it's not the greatest thing to tell people, I live in a bedroom by myself in some random house, and I work a night, especially with like, I had a great job, before.
Oh, almost a dream job, right?
It was a great job. I love the job. I got to travel all over the country and make great stuff with great people and work with great brands and use my gifts.
Yeah.
And I was blessed to do that. And I, drove one of my favorite cars ever. And I lived in a nice apartment and all these things. But it's hard to overcome when you're in comfort.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people that have gone through situations like I've gone through, I think a lot of people hold on to bitterness because they actually attach themselves to the comfort of, their lives, and it actually prevents overcoming. And I feel like one of the reasons why I'm able to walk in such joy and such freedom from going through one of the worst possible things that you can go through, is because I've said, okay, God, like I've got nothing left in my life to hold back from you, and I give it to you,
right?
And so because of that, He said, okay, you're gonna work a night shift at some warehouse job, and you're gonna live in a bedroom, and you're gonna drive a van, and you're gonna move to a city and know one person.
Who is that?
This guy.
Okay.
You know, one person.
All right.
But if you stay faithful to me, and if you be obedient to me in the little things,
come on,
then I'm going to give you health for your soul, and I'm going to restore your soul.
That's good.
And I think a lot of people are scared to do that, and so they actually walk for 20 years. They walk for 40 years in the wilderness.
Right.
And some people never leave the wilderness, and they die in it because they're not willing to, let God take Egypt out of them.
Yeah, that's good.
And take bondage out of them. So
that's good.
Yeah.
So overcoming looks more spiritual.
Yeah.
Like a spiritual overcoming than a natural. And I love that you said, the spiritual thing comes before the natural thing. And that's just faith. Like it's faith. It's faith in, okay, God, you brought me here. And so many people, I think one of the hardest things that you've gone through is, moving here and having people not understand. One of the big questions was, well, how could you leave your kids?
Yeah.
And how
huge
question
and valid question
and understandable. Yeah. Right. But that's a big question that people will probably not understand, even after all of this. And they see natural, earthly, tangible, physical things happen that it's like, look at the blessings that are in your life in the physical way. But right now it's such a question mark for people because they're like, what God would ask you to move away from your kids, you know? And what's your response?
Well, it doesn't, before, the great thing about God is that He gives you what you need before you walk through what you have to go through. That's just how He works. And you don't know you need it until you walk through something. And so before I ever found out that my wife was having an affair with my best friend, before I ever...
Watch the video.
Yes, watch the video. But before I ever knew that, He put in me what I needed to walk through that season. And so, when it came time to say, okay, wow, now this has dropped into my lap.
Right.
It was God's, okay, remember this. Remember who I've called you to be. Remember that I've given you these kids to raise them upright, to set an example for them, to protect them, to provide for them. And so, when I look at, elements in the Word, and when I look at Scripture, and when I look at examples of, fathers that I've had in my life, spiritual fathers, my physical father, and I look at fathers in the Bible, you look at Abraham and Isaac, And God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, to go up on the mountain and sacrifice him. And it was because of, God wanted to know, can I trust Abraham?
Right.
Will he do what I want him to do? Will he be obedient?
Yeah.
And will he sacrifice for me?
Right.
Because I'm the end all be all. And, I know what's best. The Lord knows what's best.
That's it.
And so for me, the thing I always come back to is I want my kids to grow up and say about me is I want them to say that he lived his life obedient and as a sacrifice for the Lord.
That's good.
And I want them to see that example and see the fruit on my life because I've chosen that and follow that. And what better way than to set example with my own life?
Right.
Right. Because I think so many, I don't have old kids. I have my daughter's 4 and my son is 2.
Yes.
But what I do know is that if you don't set example, your kids will never learn, you know? And so that's what I desired. And I think, what better way than to live it with my own life?
Yeah. I think one of the things that through this season for you, to use Christian lingo, is that faith is one of the biggest things that we have to use in this life as a Christian. And we're called, we're saved because of faith, I love that even when Jesus healed people, he said, do you want to be healed?
Yeah.
Like he asked them. And many times it's like, your faith healed you. Yeah. Right? It's because you believe you could be, that's what actually opened the door to healing, right? And so, a lot of people, it takes a certain type of person to leave their children, right?
Yeah.
And there has to be great faith for multiple reasons. And not that they're in a bad environment or whatever, right? But many people would feel like they need to control or be near to have some of that control. And when you leave, you literally release.
You
and
release
you have to have
control.
You have to have faith that my kids are going to be okay.
Yes.
That they're going to be in a good environment. Yeah. That, they're going to be safe. And that, that it's that whole, you're the father, you're the protector. And now you're leaving and you're like, okay, God, you are the ultimate protector. And I have faith that you're going to protect them in my physical absence. Yeah. Because I'm obeying you, and they will receive the favor of your obedience. Yeah. And I think that's the thing where people they often look at the now, but they don't look in the 20 years and the 10 years and the favor that they're going to live in. Yeah. Right. Because of your obedience. So, going through that hard decision, I think is something where in our life, it seems like there's always going to be this decision. And it may not be always like leaving your children, right?
It's not always that extreme.
Yeah. And it's one thing, and I don't know how far we want to go into this, but I'll just say, I've known you for a long time and you and I walked through this. Yeah. And it's interesting because, there was a time where you're like, you can see what's going to be the easier path. Right. Right. Yeah. And we talked about it and you're like, this other path seems easier. Right. But then you realize that it's not.
No, it's actually,
right. And so that's the interesting part is like, it may seem like it was just easy to move and leave. Yeah.
No, it's actually, right? Yeah, it's actually
that's the hard part. It's actually the harder part.
You know what it is? It's easier to stay.
It is.
It's easier to stay in comfort in things that you've known. And it's easier to stay in pain, honestly. Because I think the pain of change is a lot greater than pain of staying the same and staying in the same. Yes. And so that's what it's. It's just what you said. I'm a father, and my kids are, one of the most important things in my life, as kids should be to their fathers. But to take off that control and say, you know what, Lord, you can protect them way better than I can ever. Right. And you know what's best for them, and you will bring people into the lives that, I don't know what God's going to do. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. It's the faith. Yeah. I have no idea what he can do or how he can, mend situations or work, or like bridge gaps and do this. And, I don't know what he holds, but I do know what he's asked of me. And I do know that it's my job to do what he says.
That's good.
And so, I want to raise kids that do that, in 20 years when my kids are my age, and God tells them to do something, I want them to do it because they've seen me do it and they've seen, okay, like it. Another reference to the video is, I talked about the fruit of obedience in my parents' life and the things that they walked through and the choices that they made to move and do this and go and, and invest their lives. And I saw the fruit of obedience in their lives.
Right.
And so I can only do the same thing. I want to see, I want my kids to see the fruit of obedience in my life. And so I have to be obedient to get that fruit first.
Yes.
And so, but yeah, it's one of those things where, you have to, that's an element that's really unseen of healing. And I think that, a lot of times I think in our culture, we could put so much emphasis on, taking a deep dive into our emotions and, really expanding, and all those things are great, right? You want to understand and figure out what you're feeling and understand how to process things. And, but what I think our culture sometimes miss is, like these kingdom elements of like faithfulness and obedience and sacrifice,
right?
That all require you to not really know the end result and not really know the next, step. And, the Bible says the word is a lamp unto our feet. It lights our path. It's not, it's not a spot, it's not a floodlight.
Sure.
And so I think a lot of times we don't realize that these little things like faithfulness and these little things like obedience, even in small things, and these little things like sacrifice actually have a healing element to our soul.
Yeah.
And those are actually the ways that we can heal way quicker than, saying like, okay, let me just sit down and figure out my emotions and really dissect them and all this. Like, I don't want to knock that, but I think a lot of times we can heal way quicker if we just practice the small things, and practice the things like, simple obedience, simple sacrifice,
right,
or big sacrifice, like I have, walked through. Sure. But I think that's one of the reasons why I have been able to overcome. Sort of like, obviously, there's still elements that I have to walk through of overcoming and healing. But I think that's one of the reasons why I can sit here and say I'm the healthiest I've ever been. Physically, I'm the healthiest I've ever been. Mentally, I'm the healthiest I've ever been. Spiritually, emotionally, I'm the healthiest I've ever been in my entire life. And, it's been a year and a half, just about, since I've started to walk through this process. And it's because of obedience. Wow. It's because of faithfulness. It's because of sacrifice. The things that don't really have a really clear element of healing to them. Sure. But they're healing, Yeah. So.
That's good. I'm glad this is kind of the conversation we wanted to have because, we could probably sit here all day and talk about it, right? Because we
do.
And we do.
Yeah. That's why we're starting a podcast.
Yes. Because we're like, we just might as well record. And also not just that, because we do understand that, people may not understand your specific reason why you said yes to moving.
Right.
Ultimately, yes to the Lord.
Yeah.
And, I have a story too. I have a journey too that I walked through, and I came before you did.
Yeah.
And I also walked through something. Yeah. And I also had to leave family. And I also, and then when you start realizing that, we've actually gotten to this place and gotten into a community where as we start meeting people and building relationships, we realize, wait a second.
Yeah, everyone has a story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, so it's really easy to judge people based on, your experience or your comfort level or what you think how people should live.
Right.
But I think we want to tell stories and have conversations to open up a little bit of that thought process for people to say, hey, faith, don't think this is easy.
Oh, yeah.
Don't think this was the if you will, the cop out move to just like, I'm just gonna dip and I'm gone.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's easier to just run away and hide. I'm gonna go ahead and run away and hide. This wasn't that. This was actually the hard. This is the hard thing.
It's the hard choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
but it was done because you were led by God to do it.
Yes.
Not because it was a selfish thing.
No, I mean, you think about, I mean, just being real, we had conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, this feels like, I remember telling you, moving to Nashville seems like the easy way.
Yes.
Yes. You remember that conversation?
Yes.
It feels like the easy way than staying and, figuring out like, okay, what does it look like to live, and do this? But ultimately, it's about, if God calls you to do something and he tells you to do something, then he has the back end worked out.
That's it.
And so, if we want to say, okay, if we want to choose the choice of the clear path, the path that we can see, the path that we can control the most,
right?
The path that we, can see how it plays out, the path we could see a bunch of steps, then it's probably not the way to go.
Yeah.
And for me, the path that was faith, the path that was obedience, the path that was sacrifice, was the path to move to Nashville. And like you said, it's been harder.
Oh yeah.
It's not easy to live in a bedroom for 8 months. It's not easy to go and live in a city where no one.
Right.
It's not easy to work a night shift coming from, a job where you did what you love and use your gift. It's not easy to live, 7 hours away from your kids, And if anyone knows me as a dad, you know how hard that is for me.
Yeah.
And so, I think it just gives context to understanding, what it takes, to overcome.
Yes.
Is a lot of times so much more difficult. But the fruit of obedience and the fruit of sacrifice, the fruit of faithfulness, the fruit of, all these things that I've had, the fruit of suffering is actually life.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't.
It makes zero sense.
But, one of my favorite verses, and this is kind of, as we wrap this conversation up, like, this is kind of part one of a furthering conversation of overcoming, right?
Yeah.
But one of my favorite verses is, and many people know this, is we will overcome by two things, the blood of the Lamb, and that helps like us when we receive salvation and we get saved, of course, and our sins are covered by his blood, and we're free because of his blood, because of his sacrifice.
Yeah.
We will overcome by that and by the word of our testimony.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, we had an epiphany last year in my driveway after we were eating some, I don't know what we're doing, but
it's like 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Too,
But it was kind of this like, what is To the Throne going to be? And of course you're walking through this journey. You're here, you moved here and you lived in my house.
Yeah.
In my office on a horrible futon for 3 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
And it's funny because you live in a bedroom now, but how much better is it? And it's
I
like
have a bed.
Yes, you have your own bed.
Let's just think about that for a second, okay? I didn't have a bed.
Yes. For a long time.
For almost 6 months.
Yeah.
I didn't have a house to go home to.
Yeah.
Or a bed to sleep in.
So
to call my own.
Even just that, like if you're grateful, if you live a grateful life, you start realizing that God has blessed you, even in the midst of you still live in a bedroom.
I can't be anything other than thankful.
Right. So we will overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And I think sometimes it's interesting that people can be offended by your testimony. It's interesting because we got a little bit of that feedback. Yeah. And we also knew that once you start telling your story, unfortunately, it does impact other people. Yeah. And it's not, your story isn't to make other people look bad. It's to make God look good. Yes. Because he's good.
Understand what he's done.
And God is still good and he still loves all the people involved. Yeah. And he still cares for all the people involved and he still died for all the people involved. And he still has a plan for all the people involved. And nobody's beyond his grace and forgiveness.
He still has forgiven all the people
I need to be
involved.
forgiven. You need to be forgiven. Yes. And so the whole point is we want to continue to have conversations about overcoming.
Mm-hmm.
And what better way to start is to actually talk about our own stories, right?
Yeah.
And so, we got some other things kind of planned in the works, right?
Yeah.
Real quick, I mean, we did release a T-shirt as well.
Yeah.
So this is just a small little wing, and spend a lot of time on this right now. We did release a T-shirt. We'll probably spend some more time kind of talking about it.
Right, in the future.
And so we'll also kind of talk about clarifying, okay, well, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, right.
What is this, a T-shirt? What is this?
Yeah.
But it's all part of kind of what the vision that God spoke to you 4 years ago, right? And so you guys got to stay tuned, because it'll start making a little bit more sense.
Yes.
And it's also something that we're also working out.
Yeah, we're walking through.
And walking through it in faith too, and saying, okay, God, what's the next step?
Yeah, I mean, that's another element of, just of overcoming is using what you have.
Yes.
And doing what God has put in front of you. And so
even when it doesn't seem...
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
or you don't have the full picture, it's like it's trust,
right. And so, for all of you guys who have purchased a shirt, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That, those funds are going to just help us continue to make these videos and make content that is really pointing to the throne. At this point, going to the throne is very important. And, ultimately, I mean, I have a life verse, but this is your life verse. What's the verse?
It's Hebrews 4:16.
Okay.
And Hebrews 4:16, it says, come boldly to the throne of grace to obtain mercy and find grace to help you in your time of need.
Boom.
That's it. It's as simple as that.
Does everyone have needs?
Everyone's got.
Does everyone need grace?
Everyone needs grace. Everyone needs mercy.
Okay. And how do you get that?
You come boldly.
That's it. So that's part of kind of what we want to talk about and unfold, and also have a conversation piece. I wore the shirt yesterday. Went out and met a friend and wore it yesterday. Walking into a coffee shop. Yeah. And I mean, the first person I see says, "Oh, I love that shirt." Yeah. And it's one of those, like, it's a simple shirt. Right. It's nothing crazy. Yeah. Classic look. Yeah. We spend a little time on, like, making sure the quality is good and like bringing a good product. Representing well. Yeah. But we also want to have conversations. Yes. And we want fashion can be used for a couple things. Yeah. But it'd be great to have a conversation on what would us to the throne. Mm-hmm. So, check out the shirt. Buy it if you think it's cool. Buy it if you don't think it's cool. It is. Give it to somebody. Yeah. But as we wrap up here, we do have some things. We got some more stuff planned. Yeah. So stay tuned. Yeah. Next episode of the podcast, we're gonna kind of unfold, dive a little deeper. Yeah. Things are happening, right? Things are happening, and you guys are gonna go through the journey with us. Yeah. So we're glad you're here. Yeah. You want to wrap it up? Yeah. I mean, just to recap, anyone can overcome. And overcoming takes obedience. It takes sacrifice. It takes faithfulness. And whatever you're walking through, you can overcome if you just trust the Lord. You have faith. He's got a plan. But no, overcoming is not limited to any person. And the Spirit will give you exactly what you need. He takes you from here to there. Watch the video. Takes you from here to there. Yeah. He knows exactly what you need. And He wants to give you a story of overcoming, much like He's given me. So, we just want to thank you for listening, and stay tuned because we got more stuff. But we want to thank you for going to the throne with us. Yeah. You guys take care. See you soon. Peace.